The Fourth Amendment of the Constitution basically provides people the right to be secure in their persons in their house, and it protects them against illegal searches, and basically was the Founding Fathers saying that the government should not be able to infringe on a citizen's rights or privacy. And of course, obviously, that's taken away probable cause, which for a long time in this country protected a lot of people. But then a little something in the 80s happened called DARE, where it was the war on drugs. They were going to end drugs, which we all know is ridiculous. I mean, things have come out in the 60s that our own government was pushing LSD and monitoring the effects it had on society. Then in the 80s, while this was happening, investigator Gary Webb uncovered this.
It was about a cocaine ring that operated along the west coast of the United States throughout most of the 80s. And they were funneling, they were selling cocaine in South Central. They were also selling it in Oakland. They were selling it in San Francisco. They were selling it in San Jose. And some of the money they were making was going to support an army that the men who ran the cocaine ring worked for, called the FDN. This was an army that the CIA started in 1981 and supported.
Better known to us, most of us who remember news, the Contras in Nicaragua. So go right ahead.
The men that were running the cocaine ring were top officials of this Contra army. And what we found was that they were selling this stuff in South Central, which is, predominantly black section of Los Angeles, immediately before the outbreak of the crack cocaine epidemic. They started selling powder. Tons and tons and tons of powder cocaine was going into this one small area of the city. And from there, they sold it to Freeway Rick. And Freeway Rick took the powder, turned it into crack, and starting in 1983, 1984, began distributing it to predominantly the gangs, the Crips and the Bloods in Los Angeles, and they spread it, from there.
From there. Now, since this has happened, you have butted heads with everybody in Washington D.C. trying to get information about the story. Have you not?
Yeah, we worked on this for a year, and it was only because some people at National Archives believe freedom of information means freedom of information. We got some documents that showed that pretty strongly there were some CIA connections to this.
Let's talk a little bit about those documents for a second, because there's a gentleman, this figure that we talked about yesterday on the show. His name is Blandón. Danilo Blandón, who was a person who was a member of the aristocracy of Nicaragua before the fall of Somoza, and then he fled and comes to the United States and decides, while he's in the United States, so you can all understand this, he wants to raise money for the revolutionaries who are trying to overthrow the government that just overthrew them. So here in the United States, they try to do fundraisers, and that doesn't work, and then Blandón gets a scheme. Well, I can get some cocaine cheaply with some help from some of my friends and get it into the United States of America. All I need to find is somebody who can sell it. So they find a gentleman by the name of Rick Ross, who is Freeway Rick. Rick Ross comes in and starts selling cocaine at the terms beginning 1 or 2 grams, and within weeks 2, 3, 4 kilos a week. Within months, what was it, 10 to 15 kilos a day. Ricky Ross was selling cocaine to the point of making $3 to $4 million a day. He sold so much cocaine, it hurt his fingers to count the money. Not only in Los Angeles, but in Cincinnati, in St. Louis, all the way across America. So some can say, and this is the reason why people are so angry at you in your article, is that Ricky Ross, the dope dealer, was supplied by the CIA because Blandón was an operative for the CIA, correct?
Blandón and Meneses were working for an army that was a wholly owned subsidiary of the CIA. They were meeting with CIA agents. Blandón, and this came out in court. I mean, Danilo Blandón is now a government witness. He works for the Drug Enforcement Administration, and we've paid him, I don't know, $166,000 over the last 18 months because he's such a good informant. So they put him on the witness stand in Ricky Ross's case, and he testified that in 1981, he went to Honduras. He met with the commander, the military commander of the CIA's army, and he was instructed to go raise money in California for this Contra army. And he was told that the ends justified the means.
And those ends being sell cocaine if you have to.
Well, look, he was in the room with the Nicaraguan representative of the Cali cartel, Mr. Meneses, and he was in the room with a government marketing expert named Danilo Blandón. Now, if they weren't talking about selling cocaine, I don't know what they were talking about.
Here's a guy who is obviously a CIA operative, Mr. Blandón, who is working with this government-backed army that we've kind of created in Nicaragua. But how the heck does this guy get to bring in tons of cocaine? When I say ton, I'm talking tons 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 tons of cocaine weekly in the United States of America for 7 years, and no one can ever catch him.
Well, number one, Mr. Meneses was actually indicted in 1984. He was known within, my own sources in DEA told me he was known as el rey de la droga, the king of drugs. He was in more than 40 files and indicted mysteriously, and people within DEA say that it was CIA intervention that kept this sealed indictment from ever being opened. So he was well known. He's well known. The connection between him, Blandon, and Calero, who was the head of the Nicaraguan government in exile, is clear. There's a clear evidentiary.
We got a picture of it.
Yeah, there's a clear evidentiary trail. Now, if you want to follow that trail up, you have to first understand how CIA and DEA work. I was a country attaché assigned to Argentina. Now, during those years, there were people who I inherited on the payroll who were murderers. They were also on the CIA payroll. So,
Murderers on the CIA payroll.
Not only murderers, I'm talking about mass murderers. And I wrote about it in books that I thought would have America marching on Washington. Nothing ever happened.
So while it was being uncovered that this current drug epidemic of the 80s with crack and cocaine was actually being pushed by the CIA, the former director of the CIA, George Bush Sr., just happened to be in the White House at the same time that they were going to eradicate drugs and we're going to do DARE. And what did that amount to? That amount to, well, guys, we have to be able to search people to get the drugs off the street. Guys, drugs are really bad. Look at this problem that's going on. And of course they didn't stop anything because they never wanted to stop anything. The war on drugs wasn't a war on drugs. To quote Bill Cooper, the war on drugs was a war on the Fourth Amendment. It was a war on your privacy. So now fast forward 10 years and you have the events of September 11th, which we can all agree, the official narrative, which I personally bought hook, line, sinker for a long time, did not age well, okay? When you look back, there are a lot of questions and a lot of things that point to our own government and George Bush Sr. again, possibly with the Saudis. I don't want to get 100% in. I don't know who exactly did it. All I know is that they were clearly rigged for demo and that this whole thing was a setup. And what happened right after that was the Patriot Act, which gave them the ability, which took away your privacy even more, which was another hit on the Fourth Amendment. Guys, we can't let this happen again. We have to be able to spy on everybody now. It's what has to happen. And as I've mentioned many times, the man who drafted the original draft of the Patriot Act that it was mostly based on was Joe Biden back in 1995. So that's what you're voting for if you vote for that man. So isn't it funny that these are two events that a lot of the evidence points to were actually problems created by the government, and then, their only solution was to take away your rights as a citizen.
When did you know this is something that I have to do for yourself?
Charlottesville, when those folks came out of the fields carrying torches with contorted faces and carrying Nazi flags and chanting the same anti-Semitic bile that was chanted in the streets of Germany in the 30s. And
now fast forward another 10 years, and then here's all these mass shootings, ramping up with Obama all of a sudden out of nowhere. Obama, one of the keynote speakers at his special DNC, son, who was just caught with a compound training school shooters. And no one even says a word about it. They still praise this guy. The school shootings ramped up to an unprecedented level under his presidency and still haven't stopped since. And now here he is linked to someone who was literally caught last year training school shooters. Not only did it barely make the news, they run cover for this guy. And now what do they want to do? They want to take away the guns. That's what Obama, after every friggin' single one. The guns. And what do you know? We just happen to have the mass shooting in El Paso, which is where Beto Orourke represents, who just so happens to be the person pushing mass gun control. Not to mention that this shooting, people said they saw 3 shooters dressed in black.
Usted lo vio enfrente. ¿Cuánta gente vio?
¿Cuántas
personas pienso que vio?
3 o 4 personas, hombres.
Just like people said at Parkland.
He was not the only one?
No, definitely not.
Why do you say that? because when shots were fired, I saw him after the fact. So, and the shots were coming from the other part of the building. So there definitely had to be 2 shooters involved.
And like they started yelling at us to keep focused and pay attention ahead, the army people, because they didn't want us to see the bodies that they hid in the corner. They were putting mats over them so we wouldn't see them. But there was dust all over the floor from like this weird thing they screw in there. They were trying to.
So you think there was more than? Do you think there was more than one shooter?
There's 3 shooters. Definitely.
Just like people say this all the time. I mean, even going back to James Holmes, what did they say? Eyewitnesses said he was in full riot gear, but meanwhile, if you look at this security cam of him entering, he's entering in regular clothes. No, but they say he stashed it out back and he went and got totally changed into the riot gear. That was their big excuse for this. But again, Parkland, his eyewitnesses accounts that people were in full riot gear.
And I suddenly saw the shooter about 20 feet from me, standing at the end of the hallway, actively shooting down the hallway, just a barrage of bullets. And I'm staring at him thinking, why is the police here? This is strange, because he's in full metal garb, helmet, face mask, bulletproof armor, shooting this rifle that I've never seen before.
Here's the picture of Nicholas Cruz being arrested in just regular clothes. El Paso, same thing. Oh, there were 3 shooters in full black riot gear. But no, when this kid's getting arrested, he's in khakis. Something's going on. Here's raw footage from Las Vegas where you could clearly hear at least 3 different types of guns, all coming from different areas because they have different volume levels. So let's just do a quick recap here. You got Parkland, which according to eyewitness accounts had 2 to 3 shooters in full riot gear, and only 1 person was arrested in regular clothes. You have Las Vegas shooting, which people were also saying there were multiple shooters, and according to this video, you can hear clearly that there's at least 3 shooters. Only 1 person was blamed for the crimes. You have the Aurora shooting where they say that James Holmes was dressed in full riot gear, yet this video shows him in plain clothes. And now you have El Paso, which fits this mold, where you have reports of 3 to 4 shooters dressed in all black, but only 1 shooter was arrested dressed in regular clothes. Right? Something. I'm not saying I 100% understand what's going on. I have my theories, but this is obviously another setup. And what are they doing? They want to take away more of your rights. Now they want to take away your Second Amendment. And here's Beto Orourke.
Hell yes, we're going to take your AR-15, your AK-47. We're not going to allow it to be used against our fellow Americans anymore.
Yeah, he's going to take away your guns. Now, the Second Amendment isn't for hunting. The grand idea of the Second Amendment is to arm yourself against a tyrannical government. I think it's safe to say the people who have taken over our government are definitely tyrannical. Now, am I saying we should take up arms and go after them? No, absolutely not. I don't even own a gun. I have no dog in this fight. But the spirit of it is to have it to protect yourself in case something like Nazi Germany, where they start going house to house and rounding people up, things that we're never going to see because we are an armed public. But do you really want to take the chance that that won't happen? It's literally happened so many times in history. What should make this so different? Who says those countries were any different before that happened? We're one of the last, if not the last, first world nation to be disarmed. Australia, England, all these places, they've disarmed them. I would suggest that we're one of the last things holding these people back from complete world domination. I mean, what do they have to stop them after we're disarmed? But isn't it something that we're one of the last big nations to be disarmed, and all these shady shootings keep happening? And now one happens right in the town of the candidate that this is his whole thing. He's pushing de-armament. Oh, how convenient that another shady shooting happened right there. And here he is talking about it. Now, this is what you're about to see here. It's called Duper's Delight.
I'm incredibly saddened, and it is very hard to think about this.
All right, so when it happens is a big joke, and that's what's called duper's delight. This is when you're lying to someone and you can't stop yourself from laughing about it. It happens all the time. It's one of the telltale signs that someone's lying. In fact, looking at this, the way he reacts to this shooting, you can tell it's a setup. I mean, 100%. This has happened many times. Look at this is a famous case here from the Sandy Hook, another shooting that seemingly has a lot of weird things around it. And look, he's laughing and joking because he don't know the camera's on. And then all of a sudden the camera comes on and he's serious. I mean, this is a family member who just lost someone. Wouldn't you be crushed? I certainly would not be laughing. All right, but we're starting to see a pattern now. This is how you slowly erode the Constitution. Of course, the Constitution is the one thing that makes us free. It's one of the greatest documents ever created. But this is how you slowly erode it. You create a problem, and then the only fix is guys, you got to give up some of your rights. We can't let this problem to keep going on. Or then you create another problem. Guys, we have to be able to search on people. How are we ever going to stop this in the future? And you create another problem like, guys, we're going to have to take the guns away. How are we going to stop this? I mean, statistically speaking, it's not even a really viable way to stop this problem. First of all, are you going to ban guns in Mexico? You're talking about El Paso. First of all, you're talking about anywhere in the country. But El Paso, dude, if someone wants to do something terrible, they can get a friggin' gun. I don't care if you ban every single gun in this country. People are going to be making them illegally, first of all. People are going to be taking them over illegally over the border. Friggin', if you're in Texas, you're going to be able to get a gun, period. The only difference is regular citizens who simply just want something to protect their family from anyone won't be able to have a gun. And that is a terrible situation. And statistically speaking, these shootings, mass shootings and just regular shootings are way, way, way more likely in places where guns are banned. So actually, banning guns would make these shootings more likely, not less likely. I mean, seriously, we want to really get to the bottom of this. That's a terrible idea. All right, so let's think about this for a second. They've tried this. They've taken cities, completely banned guns, and it's ramped gun violence totally up. The complete opposite of what they want to do. So it's proven that this does not work. And they know this. These politicians know this doesn't work. It's statistical fact. All right, so we could cross that off the list. That didn't work. So now what's another way we can try and stop this? But they're not doing that. They're ramping it up and going twice as hard. That's not suspicious to anybody. And this isn't some wild claim that could only happen in the movies. This happens all the time. Nazi General Franz Helder testified at the Nuremberg trials that Nazi leader Hermann Goering admitted to setting the fire at the Reichstag. And what happens? Guys, we have to suspend freedom of speech, freedom of press, and all constitutional protections. I mean, this is the oldest trick in the book. Khrushchev admitted for the Red Army shelled Manila in 1939 while blaming Finland to start the Winter War. The CIA has admitted that in the 50s they hired Iranians to pose as communists and staged bombings in Iran in order to turn the country against its democratically elected prime minister. It's been admitted that the Gulf of Tonkin was made up to get us into the Vietnam War. In the 70s, a Turkish general admitted to burning down a mosque in Cyprus just to inflame the public. In his book By Way of Deception, Victor Ostrovsky admits to planting a radio transmitter in Gaddafi's compound in Tripoli where they broadcast fake terrorist transmissions reported by the Mossad in order to frame Gaddafi as a terrorist supporter. And on and on. This goes back to Nero burning down half of Rome to build his palace and then blaming it on the Christians. And then literally threw them to the lions. Sound familiar to anybody? To at least not consider it is a mistake. Now here's James Holmes' mom crying out in court that her son was mentally ill, confirmed by the court, and that the FBI set her son up to commit this act. She says, in fact, that their family was, quote, full of FBI.
He's wrong. His mental illness is everything. I'm the biological mother. She's the surrogate. They took him away from me. And then it's up because they know they have mental illness. Tell you, all of my family's full of FBI. He's got violence in his blood. We need to know. Don't kill him. Don't kill him. It's not his fault. I'm my work.
So isn't that interesting? This doesn't make the news that his family was full of FBI. And his mom cried out in court that they used his mental illness to set him up for a mass shooting. It's just like Nicholas Cruz was also determined to be mentally ill. He even reported that he was hearing voices in his head, and he was also already being watched by the FBI. Documents were just released in 2017 that show that Adam Lanza had previously been interviewed by the FBI years earlier after hacking into a government computer. Boston bomber Tamerlan Tsarnaev had been interviewed by the FBI 2 years before the bombing. Orlando nightclub shooter Omar Mateen was on an FBI watch list and had been interviewed by the FBI twice before his shooting. His father, Sadiq Mateen, had been revealed in court documents to have been an FBI informant for over 10 years. Stephen Paddock's father, Benjamin Paddock, was on the FBI's most wanted list for years. And finally, here's James Comey in 2015 admitting that the FBI let church shooter Dylan Roof's background check go through, even though he should have been disqualified due to a drug charge earlier that year. That's an awful lot of connections to the FBI for damn near every big shooting, the ones that get coverage anyway, over and over again. You create a problem so you can fix it, and in the process, strengthen your grip on the public at large. Where we go one, we go all.
If you own a gun, keep that gun. Nobody wants to take it away from you. At least I don't.
I want to be really clear that that's exactly what we're going to do. Americans who own AR-15s, AK-47s, will have to sell them to the government. We're not going to allow them to stay on our streets, to show up in our communities.
Nobody wants to take away their guns.
Nobody wants to take away people's guns.
No one's going to take your guns from you.
There's nobody in America has suggested banning any guns.
I do not want to take away any gun rights.
Nobody's taking away anybody's gun.
Nobody is coming to take everybody's guns away.
No one is trying to take away people's guns.
There's nobody who's called for gun reform legislation that's in favor of taking guns away from hunters.
Nobody's trying to take away anybody's guns.
Nobody is interested in taking away guns.
No one wants to take guns from anybody.
No one is trying to take guns away, right?
No one wants to take everyone's guns away.
No one is trying to take your guns away.
You know, if you could, would you take the wall down now? Here.
Yes.
Like you have a wall.
Absolutely.
Knock it down.
I'll take the wall down.
And do you think this...
No one is trying to take people's guns or seize people's guns.
We're not trying to take your guns.
Nobody's trying to take guns out of the hands of hunters.
Senator Sanders, you have said that people with felony records should be allowed to vote while in prison. Does this mean that you would support enfranchising people like the Boston Marathon bomber, a convicted terrorist and murderer?
I think the right to vote is inherent to our democracy. Yes, even for terrible people.
And no one's going to knock down doors to take guns out of houses.
No one is trying to take away your guns. I'm not here to take away your guns. No one's trying to take guns away from folks.
No one is trying to take people's guns away.
No one wants to take your guns away.
Absolutely.
Nobody's talking about confiscating guns.
Hell yes, we're going to take your AR-15, your AK-47.
No one's saying take away your guns.
And I think a lot of people that are out there that are hearing what we're saying right now think that we're going to try taking their guns. We're not.
Well, Pat, this argument was all about a boogie board that was placed on top of a trash can just like this. David Hogg says his 17-year-old friend put his boogie board on this beach trash can. When a lifeguard asked him to move it, he did. But then the situation took a turn.
On the day of the shooting, I got my camera and got on my bike and rode as fast as I could 3 miles from my house to the school.
Actually, that was a bad choice. Okay,
I was in my AP environmental science class when I heard the first gunshot. I looked to my left at Parker Morris and I said, hey, that sounded like a gunshot.
He said, I didn't know it was a crime to put your board on the trash can.
I'll take the wall down.
And do you think this...
That's exactly what we're going to do.
Hell yes, we're going to take your AR-15, your AK-47.